adult-oriented,
yeah,
as the Book of Esther will. This is, I don't know, the Talmud gets a lot more graphic than the Bible does, but I don't think it anything that we're hitting anytime soon. But but if you
that doesn't come up to right before Hannah's bat mitzvah again.
Right. But if you like adult, yeah, that lets you know that we're online. If you like adult content, it happens. Anyway, we'll start where we're at again. It is the text is in the chat. So desire, Brachot 4a, paragraph 19, bottom of the page. Now this is back. We've done a lot of back and forth, and we went off on a long tangent of King David and his nighttime harp, magical harp, and then through David's righteousness and not righteousness and redemption and dots in the Torah and things like this. And at the bottom of page 20, 4b19, is they return to the topic, which is, hey, when are you supposed to say the Shema? So here, without any, sometimes the Talmud will give like a word, gufa. Goof is like your body. It would be like, all right, back to the point. Here they don't have that word, but essentially what's going on is they just sort of snap. They're like, all right, what were we talking about? Oh, right, the Shema. So now we're back there, though we'll see how long we stay there. It begins V'Chachamim Omrim Ad Chatzot. They quote the Mishnah back to the Mishnah where we started. They refer back that the sages say, Chachamim, they translate rabbis, which is fine. I tend to go with sages, which is more literal. Chachamim, that means they're chachams, right? They're wise. And I'm always afraid that when we say rabbis, or when the text says rabbis, that people think that this means me or Rabbi Isaacs or Rabbi Sisi or whatever, like that, whoever. But like but when they say the rabbis, it always means the sages of old. The sages say that you can say the Shema till midnight. Then the Talmud, having quoted the Mishnah, the Gemara, the later sages will ask, Chachamim, Kaman Sfer Lahu. Who are they basing their opinion on? What are they similar to? Why are they saying until midnight? If you remember, we had like a dozen or 2 dozen different opinions of it, and who are the sages most like? If they think that if their thinking of till midnight is the same as what Rabbi Eliezer said, then they should just say it's like Rabbi Eliezer, which is to say, they're asking, if you look in the English, they're saying, in accordance with whose opinion do they hold, explaining the verse, when you lie down. This is all. What does the Torah says? It says, you shall say these words, b'shoch b'chav kumecha, when you lie down and when you rise up. So when you lie down, when is that? What does that mean when you lie down? Is it like what Rabbi Eliezer, who said when you lie down means at the time that people are going to sleep? Then they should just have said that they're just like Rabbi Eliezer. And the next piece is the top of page 21 or paragraph 20. And if they think that it's that when you lie down means the same thing that Rabban Gamliel thinks it means, which is the entire night, then let them say that they think like Rabban Gamliel. You get the difference? Like Rabbi Eliezer earlier said that when you lie down, it's like the first third of the night, the first watch, I think is what he was saying. So in other words, the time when when the Torah says when you lie down, what does it mean? The period when people are lying down, like when they go to lie down, meaning bedtime. And Rabban Gamliel, who says that, who thinks that it's the entire night, until dawn breaks, thinks that when you lie down means the whole time people are lying down, not bedtime, but bedtime plus sleep time, right? So when you lie down, does that mean when you're lying down or the whole time you're lying down? That's their question. What's the proper time to say the Shema? The Torah says when you lie down, and they're trying to figure out what that means.
But in the Torah, when it says when you lie down, is that the collective you or the individual you? Because if it's the individual you, whenever you lie down is when you lie down.
Right, exactly. So in that instance, if I'm a night owl and I like to go to bed at 2 a.m, then it's 2 a.m. And if I like to retire early, then it's 9:30. So or whatever, right? So could be that they already seems to assume that it can't be that there has to be some communal standard. They don't long entertain that this could be a totally individual thing. They think that that it's not you individual, that it's y'all, you plural. Even though if you look at the Hebrew, of course, it's shof bechav kumecha, it's not shof bechem kumechem, right? The Hebrew is singular and not plural. Hebrew, of course, has a y'all suffix, but it's not used there. But they assume that there's a communal standard that we need to have. Right? There's a time for davening, and it sort of will exist for everyone. There's a morning shema and an evening shema. The question is only, what are the windows for saying it? The Gemara continues. They really think like Rabban Gamliel. When they say until midnight, they actually think like Rabban Gamliel, just like he said, meaning that, until midnight, but they really mean until dawn. If you remember that, right? The whole they were out drinking story. Like, so again, why do they say until midnight? In order to distance a person from sin, right? You have a Kiddatanya. Here we're going to have the explanation of it. They said a different time in order to distance a person from sin. As explained, Hachmim asu siyag l'divreham kadei shelo yeh adam ba min hasadeh be'erev ve'omer elech leveiti ve'ochel ve'kim'ah ואשתה קימה, ואשין קימה, ואחר כך אקרא קריאת שמע ואתפלל. וחוטאו שינה ונמצא ישן כל הלילה, אבל כל הלילה. End of sentence. So the rabbis created a fence for their statements, right? This, by the way, is the same. If you show up early Saturday mornings, you know the first Mishnah in Pirkei Avot is that it's the whole chain of transmission, right? Moses receives the Torah at Sinai, passes it on, passes it down. At the end of that line, it says, make a fence around the Torah. What are they afraid of? They're afraid of this, that a person is going to come home from the field in the evening. They're assuming you're out working in the fields. You come home at dark, presumably tired from your day's work. And if you knew that you could say Shema at dawn, you're going to say to yourself, this is what say, I'll go home, I'll eat a little, I'll drink a little, I'll sleep a little, then, parentheses, I'll get up, and I'll say the Shema, and I'll say the Tefillah, the Amidah, the evening prayer. And then you're going to fall asleep, and you'll end up sleeping all night, right? So this is the key thing. If they said you have until dawn to do it, you know what people would do? Exactly what everyone does. They would say, they would push the boundary. They would say, I'll go home, I'll have dinner, I'll sleep, I'll watch some TV, I'll take a little nap, but I'll totally get up in time to say the Shema before dawn. And you know what's going to happen? If we do that, we're setting people up for failure. We're setting them up for failure. We're going to give them a different. Time. And by the way, if you look in the, it's not in the Sfaria text, but in the printed text, they have a little H there in the English, which send you over into the right margin. They have a halacha column. And this gives you sort of like, how did the halacha develop? Like if the Torah gives a command, the Mishnah and the Talmud will talk about the command, then sort of like, how does it play out in the end? Notice what their halacha is. It says a person may not eat the According to the Mishnah Brewer, which is early 20th century, late 19th century halakhic authority, one of the last great halakhic works out of Eastern Europe before the destruction of European Jewry, a person may not eat or sleep during the half hour preceding the time for the recitation of the evening Shema. When he began to eat and the time arrived, he must interrupt his meal and recite Shema without its blessings before continuing his meal. After completing his meal, he recites Shema with its blessing and recites the evening prayer. This halakha is in accordance with the unchallenged Baraita, meaning the verse that we just read, cited here. Same thing in Rambam and Maimonides and in the Shulchan Aruch. So, in other words, the halakha comes down saying, you know what, they're right. And you know what the halakha is? You can't have dinner before saying Shema. Meaning that they know, the halakha as it plays out knows that we're like the guy in that most people are like the guy in that they're afraid of, that the sages are talking about. If you can't have dinner before saying the evening Shema, Ma'ariv really is what they're talking about, the whole Ma'ariv service. Before saying Ma'ariv, you know what you're going to do every night? Say Shema. If you have it after dinner, if you say, oh, you can have dinner first, you know what you're going to do? Miss it. The one thing people will not mess with is food. So they know, and they'll fix the halakha that you can't have dinner in the evening until you've said the Shema. And the opposite will be the case in the morning. You're not supposed to eat in the morning until after Shema and Amidah. Which is more of an issue on Shabbat than it is on weekdays, but that's the story. Fascinatingly, and if you have an art school Siddur, they have like all these sort of little laws and things like that. The exception is for like water and coffee, because I can tell you I would not be able to daven a coherent Shema in the morning without coffee. Back to the text. Aval, however, Adam ba min hasadeh be'erev. If a person returned from the field, from working the field in the evening, nichnas l'Beit Knesset, first entered the Beit Knesset, went to shul. Im ragil likrot koreh, im ragil lisnot shoneh, koreh kriyat shema mitpalel ochel pito mevarech, kol over al divrei mevarech. We'll pause there. But if a person comes home from the field in the evening, first goes to shul, and then if he's accustomed to reading Torah, he'll read some Torah. If he's meaning like not like formally out of the scroll, meaning like study, they might have only had scrolls, but like study a little bit. If he's accustomed to studying a couple of Mishnayot, he'll read some Mishnayot. He'll read some of the Mishnah. He'll learn some, and then he'll say Shema. And then he'll say the Amidah, he'll do the Tefillah, then he'll go home and he'll eat. And he'll say, the Brachot afterwards. That's what you should do. You know what you should do? On the way home from work, stop by shul, say Ma'ariv, then go home and eat. That way, you'll say the Shema. And then this great line. And anyone who transgresses the words of the sages is liable to the death penalty. Just what you were expecting. All right.
Rabbi, a question on this. Just coming full circle as they've now made it, okay, stop on your way home from the fields.
Yep.
and stop at the synagogue and say the Shema and all the accompanying blessings. What happened to when you lie down?
Exactly. Notice how
We've lost that now.
They've redefined when you lie down. This is classic. Like when we say that we don't like literally follow the Tach, when you lie down could be what Alan Rubin suggested before. Like, well, shouldn't that just be when you lie down? And they're like, no, this is the time when you lie down, which means dark. Dark means like any time that it's dark, when people are lying down. So as soon as dark comes, the mitzvah begins, and that's when you can do it. So they've so they essentially have like figured out through all of this. I mean, we're not done yet, but we're not all the way down the mountain, but like we're getting there. That when you lie down means night. When you rise up means morning. It doesn't mean when you lie down or when you rise up. It means night and morning. And this is what night is, and this is what morning is. And you
if
see,
someone leaves the field before it actually gets dark, and they're going home, and they're hungry and they missed lunch, so there's a gray area there. It's not quite dark yet. And then do you have to fall back to the definition of what darkness is and the stars and everything? And, you need like a plan A and a plan B, it seems.
There is. Notice in the much later medieval and then modern halacha that comes down. In what I read, the beginning of it is, beginning of the piece I read from the margin of the page I'm looking at. A person may not eat or sleep during the half hour preceding the time for recitation of the evening Shema. They don't want you, like you almost sense this, like, don't try and cheat on me and have an early dinner and like think that you're getting out of it. Like he's sort of saying like from the
Rabbi,
time when the sun is setting, stop. Yes.
in the Orthodox shuls, where they used to have early services Friday night, they would tell you to say another Shema after it gets dark.
Exactly. Right. Yes, exactly. So when that happens, because they have a daylight, especially, it's true for Shabbat practice nowadays, especially, when daylight savings, things like this, at sundown, or dark in the summertime, 9 o'clock or whatever, right? Like, so clearly too late to expect people to eat their dinner after that, right? So so the custom will arise of you have minyan early, and they had the problem too back in Talmudic times because they didn't have electric lights. They didn't have this sort of thing. So they so what Harris just said, where you say the evening Shema as part of Ma'ariv, but it doesn't really count. After the sun is down, you should say it again, especially in the summertime. That's relatively common. It doesn't count. You're supposed to say it again. And by the way, that's technically true. I just tend not to say it because I don't think anyone's interested. But yeah.
Rabbi, don't most congregations do Mincha Ma'ariv together? So how does that fit into this?
Exactly. So that's what and you'll notice we're going to get to a point in a minute where they're sort of run into a version of that problem. That's using the, okay, we can't keep you here actually as late as it works. They run into the sociological problem of time and light. People are still going to want to walk home while there's still some light because there aren't exactly streetlights. So what they're going to end up doing is allowing for slightly early Ma'ariv, but you should still say your Shema after dark. But in order to not lose the evening service, they'll say that you can say it an hour and a quarter before sundown, an hour and a quarter rabbinic hours, right? So more in summer, less in winter. That Ma'ariv can be done from that point on, but you're still obligated to say a second Shema, like Harris said. But that is just a sociological thing so that people don't have to show up 3 times. Make it easier so they don't have to show up twice. It's pure one-stop shopping.
Yeah, they do a late mincha and then wait a few minutes and then do Ma'ariv.
Exactly. Bob?
The prayer itself says when you lie down and when you rise up. It doesn't say when the rest of the town does this. It says the Shema. It doesn't say anything about Ma'ariv and the evening prayers. You should say the Shema when you lie down, then when you get up again in the morning.
Well, I would say if we wanted to drill down to the biblical text itself, these words that I command you this day shall be on your heart. Like these words isn't defined by the Torah itself. Like it could be, there's no indication that it means these sentences and not those. It could be the whole thing. It could be all the book of Deuteronomy. It could be that whole chapter. It could be a lot longer than what we're doing, or a lot less. So yeah, but you're absolutely right. It doesn't say it. This is simply like, this is the pulling the this is how the sausage gets made. Like, how is it that the Siddur became what it does, what it is, and what Judaism became what it is? And part of it is this: they think that the tradition evolves in such a way that that's assumed to be a communal standard and not an individual standard. And I would say two things on that before we leave it. One, for traditional communities, the words of the sages have the same weight in practice as the words of the Torah, which is evident from the line that we left with. And anyone who transgresses the dictates of the sages is obligated to the death penalty, right? What's the penalty for violating Torah laws like Shabbat? Death. Oh, and what's the penalty for violating the words of the sages? Death. And we're gonna talk more about this, obviously, but like, notice that it essentially has the same effect. So that's true in traditional communities, essentially, right? Like that's and that on some levels right there on the page. Like this, that's their way of saying this has equal weight to it as if the Torah commanded it. For us, in modern times, like I would say, like most non-Orthodox Jews don't think that the words of the sages were literally handed down from Mount Sinai, or if you transgress them, that you should be given the death penalty. These aren't, Rabban Gamliel's words aren't, a direct line to Hashem. And at the same time, he was just a wise man, maybe a great sage from back when, whose words we should sort of like help create Judaism.
Rabbi?
But I think for many, for many modern Jews, for many non-Orthodox Jews, the Torah is the same. The Torah is also sort of like a foundational text of wisdom about Judaism, and we don't put people to death for gathering sticks on Shabbat, even though the Torah expressly says if people gather sticks on Shabbat, they should be stoned to death. It all sort of like in Orthodox and in non-Orthodox world, like the words of the sages and the words of the Torah end up sort of like being of similar weight. Phyllis.
Couldn't it be metaphoric? Because you're violating one of the 10 commandments, thou shalt not kill. Couldn't it be that they'll be put to death, that they will be not part of the Jewish tradition? Right.
So it is metaphoric here. Thou shalt not murder. Killing is never prohibited, just murdering. And the Torah has lots of death penalties, right? Like, so the Torah is certainly okay with killing. Yes, it seems that this is, in fact, their not politically correct way of saying this is essential and you should take it seriously. It doesn't seem that any Jews were murdered or were given the death penalty in the making of this law of the Shema. That's not. It seems that that this is a way of saying we have equal weight to, or that the system, the halachic system, is equal weight with the Torah. What this does seem to be the rabbi saying we're the Supreme Court of Judaism, and just like the Torah sort of metes out punishments for what to do, we're the ones who are administering it. So just like the Supreme Court of the United States has, in some sense, equal standing with the Constitution because they're the ones that interpret it, and what they say is what it is. And I can disagree with them, but it sort of doesn't matter. The Constitution means what the Supreme Court says it means. This is their way of saying that. The Torah means what we say it means. We're the Supreme Court and we'll interpret it for you. That seems to be the sense.
Rabbi, my understanding is that Chayav Misa, based in never, it's like something that they rarely, if ever, used.
Right. So there are, you'll find a lot of things that are, as Harris says it in proper yeshivas, Chayav Misa, that you're obligated to the death penalty or liable to the death penalty. There are lots of them. And the Talmud elsewhere will say that essentially, like a court that pronounced a death penalty once in 100 years is known as a hanging court in common parlance, meaning that it wasn't done. And part of the reason they do that is that they is elsewhere they're going to put conditions upon conditions upon conditions on going through the death penalty that make it all but impossible to carry out. So that's the paper penalty, but they make it unenforceable. 2 people, you need 2 witnesses who are kosher witnesses who see you doing it and who give you a warning, and you have to indicate acceptance of the warning and then continue to do it in front of those same witnesses, indicating your knowledge that what you're doing is liable to the death penalty. So again, if adultery makes you liable to the death penalty, 2 kosher witnesses have to see you doing it, verbally warn you that by doing this, you're liable to the death penalty. You have to verbally acknowledge that that's done and then continue doing it. And while I'm not all that familiar with adultery, my understanding is that's not the way people do it. They don't do it with kosher witnesses around who are exchanging words of Torah with them. Like I said, so again, it's a way of doing it that makes it impossible to do. So sort of the same is true here.
Rabbi.
Yep.
There's an interesting parallel of sorts in that it says something about public policy in New Jersey. Before the criminal code in New Jersey was codified in the 80s, there was an obligation that in order to establish rape, you had to have a corroborating witness, which is very, very hard to get. And that was always a problem in rape prosecutions. But practically, who sees rapes most times? So there were some extenuating circumstances where you could corroborate it in other ways, but practically, it's very difficult to ever get that corroborated.
Right. Here, I think they're doing it. So that obviously is a very serious situation that is, sort of one of the central difficult things to successfully ascertain truth on and to deal with in a just way. Here, it's funny that you mentioned it there. Here, again, as I say, I think they're doing it with the intention of making it hard to carry out the punishment. In the situation that you cite, if that's the intent, it makes it it's a whole different category.
Rabbi?
Yeah.
To me, the whole death penalty in the Torah, it begs the question, and then making it, you have so many hurdles to clear that it's near impossible, begs the question to me, why do it at all? Why not have a penalty that maybe means a little bit more? If everybody knows there's ways around it, It just seems like, someone who wants to commit adultery will do it with knowing that, what we got to do is keep away from the two kosher witnesses, or I'm not going to acknowledge if they happen to find me. I'm not going to acknowledge that I heard them.
Right, right.
And so why not have a penalty if they really want to kind of enforce the rules? Have a penalty that's not as severe, but more enforceable, that might discourage people more than this would, I would think.
So I think that's an excellent point. I think this is essentially a way of, this is and to keep with the metaphor, the equivalent of the constitutional amendment process, meaning that they have, back in the day, what they did with adulterers is they stoned them to death. Like that's the way society was, and that's in the Torah. Then the later generation inherits this Torah and is uncomfortable with the penalties therein, but they can't go back and change the words, so they change it this way. They can't go back and change the wording of the Torah just because they don't like it anymore. It's there. So they change they change the enforcement mechanism, and then what you get is the rabbis coming in now and saying, and they sort of use parallel language. The most serious things, that's what this is like, with on some level no intention of actually carrying out. That's what I think it is. I think it's the amendment process. It reminds me of the poem yesterday, right? It's not just the history. What I'm going to get that lovely poem wrong, but it's not the history that you inherit, but what we do to try and repair it. Which is a powerful line. Like this sort of like it's. I think part of what they're doing is respecting the history and repairing it. They won't insult those that came before, and they can't say we're more important than the Torah, or the Torah was wrong, so we're going to get rid of the death penalty on it. They can't say it. They can't say it. So they do this. So that, and the note on this, by the way, if you're looking at the print edition at the bottom of the page, you're obligated to death penalty. And I don't necessarily, this may be a little apologetic, their note at the bottom of the page. The special status according to the sages, and especially the fences that they erected around the Torah, could be rendered ineffectual if not practiced with the same stringency as the Torah itself. In several cases, the Gemara, the Talmud says, the sages invested their pronouncements with more stringency than Torah laws. Since Torah laws were generally observed more vigilantly than rabbinic laws, it was necessary to insist upon fulfillment of the latter to not be diminished. So then they say clearly liable to receive the death penalty does not refer literally to a court-imposed death penalty, meaning they think that even that in the original, no one actually thought that missing the Shema made you liable to death. But rather comes to convey that one who transgresses rabbinic pronouncements is deserving of death because he is committing a transgression before God, which is to say, they're making fences around the Torah to prevent you from violating the actual Torah. Most people, even then, are stricter with Torah mitzvot. So they're saying, sort of like, if you violate this, you're going to end up violating that. Like, let's not kid ourselves. The version of as soon as you say, I'll just have dinner and take a little nap, then I'll get up early, I'll set my alarm and get up early and say the Shema on time, you violated the commandment. Like, let's face it. So that, but this is part of it. And Sherry has a comment, I was always told you should take the Torah seriously, but not literally. And I think that may be a good way of doing it. Seriously, but not literally. Though, yeah. The version of that phrase has been bouncing around the larger culture also recently. Maishna. Next part of the section goes, what's the difference here? Maishna. דוחה דלא קטני חייב מיתה, ומה ישנה חכה קטני חייב מיתה? Says, wait a minute, why here? Like, lots of mitzvot out there, and we weren't told, oh, and by the way, it's a death penalty if you transgress it. Why here are you teaching that, right? This is again, like sort of like the classical questioning of the text, right? Like sort of like, that's weird. Why are you saying that here instead of somewhere else? This again, the sort of like lawyerly way that the text will question itself. Why are you teaching that here? Answer, Ivaitema. You might say this is going to give two opinions. Mishum Dika Ones Shena. You might say that that the reason that they say, oh, this hive did the death penalty is the reason I said a moment ago that, oh, the risk that you're going to be overcome by sleep and you're going to miss the Shema, right? That Shema is important, Torah commands it. So so they say this death penalty thing here to make sure that nobody like falls into the, I'm just going to take a quick nap trap. Or if you wish, you can say it the other way, that it's for the person who says that the morning prayer is mandatory, chovah, and the afternoon prayer, mincha, is mandatory, chovah, but evening prayer, optional. And this is to teach you that evening, that Aravit, Mariv, the evening prayer is mandatory. So that's why they say it here. Now, what are they saying? If the prayer times are all set according to the sacrifices in the temple, in the Torah, right? Based on the Torah, right? That there's a morning sacrifice, so there's a morning Amidah, Shachri. There's an afternoon sacrifice, Mincha, and so there's an afternoon Amidah, Mincha. There's an extra sacrifice on Shabbat and holidays called Musaf, so there's an extra Amidah on Shabbat and holidays, Musaf. There is no mandatory evening sacrifice in the temple. In the temple, they just burned off the leftovers. Anything left over on the altar, they would burn off in the evening. So most of the time, there's something going on the altar in the evening, but not all the time. So technically, they're saying that while Shacharit, Musaf, and Mincha are obligatory from the sort of like the Torah would command it, Ma'ariv, not so much. Ma'ariv has a lower status because it's not linked to one of the sacrifices in the temple. So you might say it's not obligatory, and they're saying, oh, so we threw in the whole death penalty thing here to teach you that Ma'ariv is obligatory, even though it has a lesser status. By the way, the end of this is that the lesser status thing is that's why we don't have a repetition. You know, in the morning Amidah, you say you have a repetition with the Kedusha. Musaf Amidah, you have a repetition with the Kedusha. Afternoon Amidah, you have a repetition with the Kedusha. Evening, you don't. You might have just been at Ma'ariv a couple of minutes ago and we didn't have the repetition. Why not? Because it has a lesser status for this very reason. That's the evolution of Ma'ariv, lesser status, and they're freaked out that you're not going to do it just because it has a lesser status. Now we're going to get into the structure of the Siddur. I get to go on? I'm going on because this is good. Amarma, this is the top of page 22 in the text, or in 4A, 4B, online. Let me find the right spot. It is paragraph number 6, 4B6. Says Amar Korei Kriyat Shema Mitpalel. In the Baraita, meaning that longer paragraph that we did a moment ago, it said that, you know, he'll come home or go to shul, read the Kriyat Shema. By the way, that's one of the first times we've seen a reference to shul, right? Like there's no Beit Knesset, there's no shul, there's no synagogue in biblical times, obviously. that's like one of the first times you see a reference where they're like, oh yeah. He goes to Beit Knesset. He goes to the synagogue, right? Amar. In that section there where they're talking about that, Korei Kriyat Shema umit palel. He's going to say the Shema and mit palel, say the tefillah, the Amidah. Says Messiah Rabbi Yochanan. When it says that supports what Rabbi Yochanan says. Damar Rabbi Yochanan, because we have a quote of him who says, Ezehu ben olam haba, who is a ben olam haba, which they translate as assured of a place in the world to come. This is your reward for showing up tonight. Who is assured of a place in the world to come? Zeh hasomech geula letefillah shel arvit. The one who, they say juxtaposes, I think maybe connect might be an easier word to use. The one who connects geula, redemption, the prayer of redemption, that says Goel Yisrael, to tefillah, to the Amidah in Mariv, in Arvi, in the evening service. So he says, what do you have to do to get into the world to come? Make sure that the blessing that comes after the Shema, Ga'al Yisrael, Micha Mocha, Ga'al Yisrael, Baruch Atah Ga'al Yisrael, and the Amidah are somech, juxtaposed, connected to each other. By putting those two together, the blessing after the Shema and the Amidah, that is your ticket to be a ben olam haba, which they translate as one who is assured of a place in the world to come. Being a ben something or a bat something is to be in the category of people who are included in it, right? So if you're a ben olam haba, you are sort of like in the world to come. If you're a ben Torah, you are somebody who like is immersed in Torah. If you're a bar or bat mitzvah, same thing. You're one of those who's sort of like in the category of those who have to do mitzvot. Again, not son of the commandments, not daughter of the commandments. It's just a way. It's the idiom for you're in the category of. So ben olam haba, one who's in the category of those who get in olam haba. So a lot easier than you might have thought. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi Omer, similar to Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, says tefillah be'emsa tiknum. He says the prayers were instituted to be between, meaning they translate that as, according to Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, one recites the morning Shema, then recites all the prayers, and only after the recitation of the evening prayer does he recite the evening Shema. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, has a different order for his Siddur, a different Seder for his Siddur. He thinks, Shofchav Kumecha, when you lie down, when you rise up, means the first thing you say when you rise up in the morning should be Shema. The last thing you say when you go to bed should be Shema. In between, everything else. So he wants to structure things so that start out with the Shema, then you're gonna do the Amidah. Then you'll do your afternoon Amidah, and then you'll do your evening Amidah at appropriate time. And then the Shema again, meaning that the Shema sort of is the sandwich bread between everything else. And that's sort of like in keeping with Shof Chav Kumecha. So what are they disagreeing about? They say, so if you wish they're disagreeing, like why do they disagree? Like one says that you have to connect Geula, the prayer, the Micha Mocha, to the Amidah, which means first you say the Shema, then you say the Amidah, and the other one saying you do it in the other order. So that's what they're disagreeing on. So they're going to ask, why are they disagreeing? You know who wins the argument because you know how every Siddur you've ever seen in your life looks, which is, it looks like Rabbi Yochanan says it should look. It does. First has the Shema, then it has Micha Mocha Al Yisrael, then it has the Amidah. So we know Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi loses, but they're going to ask, but they don't know that yet. They're saying, why are they disagreeing? And they're saying that Well, they might disagree because they interpret a verse from the Torah differently, or they might disagree because they understand things logically differently. If you think that it's logic, the argument would be, this is from their commentary, relate to the redemption recited after the Shema, which is the focus of the exodus from Egypt, the first redemption. The question is whether that redemption began at night, which would render it appropriate to juxtapose, to connect redemption to the blessing of the evening prayers as well. For in prayer, immediate redemption, or they're going to argue about when did the redemption happen, meaning the first redemption, when the Jews came out of Egypt, was that a daytime miracle or a nighttime miracle? That's what they're asking. We're going to thank God for redeeming us. What's the proper time to do it? So, and the proper time to do it, they want to link to, when did the Exodus happen? Was it at night or was it in the day? Now the plague, the last plague, of course, takes place, which we'll read about in this week's Parsha. The last plague, of course, takes place at night. But is that the redemption? Because it seems that they walk out during the day or at morning time, right? Like they walk, sort of like the sun would come up and they walk out. So that's sort of what they're arguing about, because so he's like, oh, like who cares about, you don't have to say you don't have to do this, be concerned about the prayer of redemption at night. You should say it during the day. Daytime is more important because that's when redemption happened. The Rabbi Yochanan says, Gula ma'orta name. Rabbi Yochanan says that holds that redemption occurred in the evening as well, but the full redemption was in the morning. So he says, you should sort of do it both, have a redemption prayer night and morning, because part of it is sort of at night, because that's when the plague hit and when, and Pharaoh said, finally go. And if you look in the Torah, you'll sort of see this, but they don't walk out till morning. So he's like, you should do it both. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, on the other hand, says, since the full redemption doesn't happen till the morning, you should really only need to say the redemption prayer in the morning, because they don't walk out till morning time. Or maybe that's not what they're disagreeing over. Maybe they disagree over this line that we've been arguing about all along, that they're reading when you lie down, when you rise up differently. I'm going to skip over this next part because it gets too deep into the weeds on this next bit. And I might pause there because we're getting late. But what I want to do is give you a preview of what's next, which is, I'll do this last bit on page 22. This is in the, we'll do one last paragraph. And this is, if you're looking online, paragraph number 12. So Metiv Mar Ravina. Mar, son of Ravina, raised an objection from the Mishnah, because in a different Mishnah it says, and the evening you say 2 blessings for the Shema and 2 after, right? If you look in the Siddur, this is what we do. And if you have to connect if you have to juxtapose these, blessing of redemption and tefillah, how can you do it? Because Hashkivenu is in between. He brings up a point. If all you have to do is get into Olam Haba is have the blessing of redemption, Gal Yisrael, and tefillah, the Amidah next to each other, they're not. Because because you daven Mariv, Hashkivenu is in between. So they're like, wait a minute. You said all we have to do is get in the world to come, is to put these next to each other, and they're not. So this is that's a little debate that's going to come up. But part of what's valuable about this is to know that they're arguing here, 1700 years ago, about a Siddur that looks exactly the same way ours does. That when we're here in the 21st century scrolling through a Siddur online, it looks the same as theirs does. Or the order is exactly the same. So whatever its origins, we know that the essential prayers that we're looking at are the same as what they're looking at. And his problem now that he's bringing up is that you just told me that I have to have these two prayers next to each other, and they're not, because we have Hashkivenu in between. And the next page, they're going to solve the Hashkivenu problem and explain why we say Ashrei so darn often. So next class, among other things, we're going to, we'll be able to get, we're going to have the explanation to why out of 150 Psalms, Ashrei comes up so darn often. All right.